It is my great pleasure to introduce Werner Zybrands this morning. I've known him for many years. We were more or less neighbors in my younger days in Pretoria, and he and my one brother were at the same school together. Werner has had more than 50 years of municipal experience. This includes being a municipal manager of 3 different municipalities, namely Brakpan, Roodepoort, and Ouwerstrand. He is a municipal consultant and as a professor was head of the Department of Municipal Governance at the University of Johannesburg. He holds qualifications in law, public administration, and business management, and is an advocate of the High Court. In 2015, he exchanged his residence in Hermanus for the tranquility of Betty's Bay, where he serves as deputy chairman of the Ratepayers Association. Werner, with your vast experience in municipal affairs, you're an ideal person to tell us about the upcoming municipal elections and all the complications that we are likely to face. Thank you very much for addressing us this morning, and we're looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Gert. Thank you, Letitia. My topic is the municipal elections, and I use the words the good, the bad, and the ugly. You've got to decide yourselves which aspects are the good, the bad, and the ugly, but I can help you. The first part, the good part, is our legal situation in South Africa. To recap very briefly, prior to 1993, white electorates were elected on a ward basis in terms of provincial ordinances. So they had full democratic rights. The colored and Indian communities had at that stage management committees. Those management committees only had advisory powers, very limited original powers. And then sort of as a consolation prize, black local authorities in 1983 were given democratic rights within the townships. But these were regarded as illegitimate apartheid structures by most black people, and as thus such not recognized much. From 1993 in local government, we had a Transition Act, which lasted for quite a while. It brought together some of the previously apartheid divided structures together. Let's say in Hermanus' case, Hermanus and Zwelihle, brought them together, but it didn't include larger areas. Then the interim constitution of 1993 heralded this interim phase, which allowed for the full democratic elections to take place, but only at national and provincial level on the 27th of April. Then in 1995 came the first municipal elections, and then eventually we had the final constitution in 1996, which paved the way eventually for a new dispensation. Now, important provision in that constitution is that every adult citizen has the right to vote in elections, and it carries on about which types of elections, and to stand for public office. I think it's that section there, to stand for public office, which persuaded the Constitutional Court that independents could also be elected at national and provincial level. Of course, this existed at local level from the beginning. Now, it's a very complex legal background. I'm not going into any details here, but as you can see, you have the Electoral Commission Act. And by the way, note the word there, it's Electoral Commission. It's not the Independent Electoral Commission. It's a lie when they say their name is Independent Electoral Commission. And all official documents, it's Electoral Commission. It's like that in the 96 Constitution. Even their own act is such. But it was only during the interim phase, the 93 Constitution, that the name was officially the Independent Electoral Commission. Then we have the Electoral Act, which is an overarching act for most of all spheres of government. We have a Municipal Demarcation Act, which contains a lot of electoral provisions, which demarcates municipal boundaries. I'll deal with that just now. And then the Structures Act, which contains a lot of provisions, again, relating to municipal elections. And then you have the Municipal Electoral Act of 2000, and then you have regulations. It's a proper minefield. of legal prescriptions that one has to comply with during an election. The elections are essentially run then by the Electoral Commission. The new municipal dispensation, we had a demarcation board, which then established boundaries for these newly demarcated municipalities, and then reduced the municipalities, the number of municipalities. As you can see there, from 800 plus to 330 and now 257. I want to have a quick word on this. It's a trend of the government of the day to almost de-democratize South Africa. You're taking the government away from the people. You're taking the local out of local government. You're getting government from a distance, and you're creating more and more powers, or concentrating those powers in fewer and fewer hands. There's a move afoot of them for a number of years now to have the whole of Gauteng declared one megacity. Now that's massive. But then there will be one executive mayor for the whole of Gauteng. And that's my fear that we have at this stage, is the removal of the local and concentrating it at a central point. This demarcation board also demarcates wards, and it's guided by various legal considerations. Now, this is where the problem in local government throughout South Africa started, with the demarcation board. I had a very close experience with this in those years, and they simply ignored two very important considerations, actually compulsory matters they had to comply with. Namely, a municipality that's newly established should be financially viable. And secondly, it must have the administrative capacity to manage that municipality. It's simply not happening in, I would say, at least 100 of the municipalities through South Africa. They are simply not financially viable. One like Makhudu in Limpopo province has hardly any income. It renders hardly any services. It's predominantly tribal land. And so there are many such cases, especially in KwaZulu-Natal, Limpopo, and Mpumalanga. Then the Structures Act created three types of municipalities. It's the metros, there are 8 of them, and local municipalities, of which Overstrand is one, and then there are 44 district municipalities. So within each district, you have a number of local municipalities. In the case of Oeverberg, we have Oeverstrand, Theewaterskloof, Kuipergullis, and Swellendam. So they constitute that district municipality. I'll have a word about this later, why this is important, the whole concept of district municipalities vis-a-vis local municipalities. In the metros, they exercise all powers and functions. At the local and district level, you have a sharing of functions. For instance, to quote just one example, the fire services is primarily a district function, and where more than one municipality shares the same waste disposal site, it becomes a district function. So the waste disposal site at Karwyderskraal belongs to the district, with rather catastrophic results at one stage for Oeverstrand. Then you have different types of municipalities, and interestingly enough, the Constitution only provides for an executive committee. In other words, where you have proportional representation of the various political parties forming that executive committee. And that was applied in both KwaZulu-Natal and the Western Cape in the beginning. The executive mayor is not provided for in the Constitution. It was slipped in through the back door with the Structures Act, and now it's become the predominant form of governance, again concentrating a lot of power in the hands of one person. A plenary one, which is for very small municipalities, they hardly exist now, where the full council has to meet on every matter. You had municipalities as small as 6 or 7 councillors, so to have subcommittees is rather ridiculous. The only municipality in the whole of South Africa that has sub-councils is the city of Cape Town. So it brings government a bit down lower in the hierarchy, where you still have some regional cohesion being represented in these sub-councils. It doesn't exist in any of the other metros, although the Act allows, therefore. And then most municipalities have ward committees. Now, the establishment of municipalities is done by this, suggested by the Demarcation Board and then officially implemented. And then you have internal structures and functionaries that are also described in the Structures Act. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but this sets out how the Speaker operates, for instance, the mayoral committees, subcommittees, and ward committees. Now, election matters that are also determined in terms of this Act is the number of councillors, and I'll come back to that now, you'll see it soon. The qualifications for councillors, virtually anybody can become a councillor. There are certain disqualifications in terms of being of sound mind. I have some doubts about that at times. And then not being insolvent and other related matters and not serving a jail sentence. Now we come to the ballot papers. This with the voting. In metropolitan municipalities such as Cape Town, you only have 2 ballot papers. The one is for a ward councillor and the other one for a proportional councillor. In the case of local councils, such as we have here in Oeverstrand, you're actually going to receive 3 ballot papers. So it's exactly the same, plus you get another ballot paper for the district municipality on a proportional basis. So in the case of Oeverstrand, you're already sitting with 3 ballot papers. And there was a call that we should combine the provincial, national, and local elections on one day. Then you're going to sit with 5 ballot papers. And some of these ballot papers are extremely lengthy as it is, and you have a lot of voter confusion at the moment as well. Spoiled ballot papers. To even contemplate this, I think it's going to be very difficult. Now, district councils have 60% proportional from local municipalities. In other words, each local municipality can nominate, in accordance with its proportionality, councillors to serve on that district. So if, let's say, for argument's sake, in the case of Oeverstrand, you have 60% DA and 40% ANC, and they can nominate 5 councillors, then there will be 3 from the DA and 2 from the ANC. And then on the 3rd ballot paper, your proportional ballot paper, that is done in accordance with the percentage vote garnered by each of those political parties. They nominate, or they pre-nominate the candidates there, and the Electoral Commission just takes the top number. So if you qualify for 5, it takes the 5 top nominations from that party's list. Right, now we get more to the realities of today. The people ask me, when do we think we're going to have this election? The Constitution is quite clear. It must be within 90 days after the 3rd of August. And my guess is going to be 27 October. I presume the Electoral Commission would like as much time as possible to prepare for the election. Theoretically, it could also be in the 3rd of November. That's cutting it a bit fine. And I suspect that COVID regulations could also play a role in this regard. So the call, for instance, of the EFF to postpone the elections is a bit ridiculous, in the sense that you first have to change the Constitution. And to effect a constitutional change is not playing Monopoly. It's a bit more complicated than that. Right. Against that backdrop, I want to discuss some of the background for the election. I'm coming eventually to my predictions, what's going to happen in the 2021 election. Now, here we have a clear indication that in 2016, the municipal elections of 2016, the ANC was by far the most dominant party, but you'll see that the DA was at 24%. That was the peak of the DA support. Since then, it's been dropping. The EFF was at 8.31, but that has been increasing. It's going towards 11. The IFP grew a bit. You can see already the independents there in local government were at the 5th most votes cast there. The AIC is a party in KwaZulu-Natal. The Freedom Front Plus has grown since then. UDM and COPE has dropped a bit. ACDP has grown a bit. Now we come to an interesting thing. The 12th most votes garnered by any association was the Bushbuck Ridge Residents Association, which is rather strange. But you might remember that there were a number of schools burnt down in that area. About 20 odd schools burnt down in a short space of time because the Bushbuck Ridge residents were up in arms about the demarcation of their area and whether they should be in Mpumalanga or in Limpopo. And then the 13th one is ICOSA. Now, ICOSA is a very local part, mainly in the Western Cape. It's mainly supported by brown people. And why I mention it here is because they act as kingmakers. They're co-running 2 municipalities at the moment, even with that small percentage votes that they have. And I'll touch upon that later again. The current political representation in the Oorfestrand, by the way, I'm not party political, I'm just mentioning facts. It's the DA10 wards, 7 PR, and end up with 17. So they clearly in a strong majority at this stage. In 2016, the Land Party didn't exist. You might recall the invasion at Skulphoek was led by some ringleaders, and they established the Land Party. And then in the by-election, they got voted in. And as you can see there, the EFF had enough votes to qualify for 1 PR councillor, and the Freedom Front of Vryheidsfront didn't have any representation. So that's the setup as it is at the moment. Now, there you can see it represented in a graphic form. There are a few also-rans there, as you can see at that stage in the political elections of 2019. That's provincial now. Remember, the other figures I had of 2016, we now at 2019. The election there, you can see that the UDM dropped back. COPE doesn't exist there on that graph. Good came in, which was a new party. And there you can see the growth of the ACDP and Vryheidsfront Plus. And then look at that, this Land Party coming in, beating some of the other parties hands down because of the support it had in that election. And remember, it's a very local party. Still DA predominant, and then the ANC. The local council composition in 2021 is going to change. There's an increase in wards from 13 to 14, the PR councillors from 12 to 13. So you're going to have a total of 27 councillors. This was done by the demarcation ward in 2019. The total number of voters are there, and you can see the average per ward. It's 4,000 per ward. Now, just as a point of interest, I've been doing some work in Cape Town. Their ward size is about 20,000 voters per ward, which is massive. It's 5 times what we have here. And it makes it very difficult for those representatives to look after the interests of so many people. And a variance of up to 15% is allowed. We have bigger concentrations in smaller geographical areas, or we have large geographical areas with scarce population. So you need that variance that should be allowed for there. Now, throughout South Africa in 2016, those were the number of candidates. If you look there, with 4,000, almost 4,400 wards throughout South Africa, and you had about over 8 candidates per ward on average. I can tell you in many cases, there were up to 20, 25 parties contesting a single ward. The number of independents is not so many, so you have a total of 63,000 candidates. I expect in 2021 for that to significantly increase. Now, I can imagine the logistics involved. And the 2016 one, they had to print 74 million ballot papers. It's a massive exercise. Now, imagine to combine that with national and provincial elections, where you're going to run to. It's a really large number that we have to cater for there. The voters per age group, now, I'm not going in details here, but what I want to highlight is that there's a trend. You can see here, although they of the highest group of young people, they're the most. The young people there, but their voting average is only 50%. You can deduct from this that young people are not that interested in municipal or other elections. They somehow they got discouraged. And as we can expect, members of the U3A falling mainly in this and up to that category, we are very diligent. The highest turnout is in this category, but our numbers are much smaller here. So although we have high percentage votes, our votes are not that many, and it's difficult to influence matters. So 50% of 6.4 million is already 3.2 million. It's about the same of those two combined. So you can see, so it makes a big difference. And I picked this up that most votes were cast actually between 7 and 11. And you might remind yourself, it's the early voters stand in queues and diligently waiting to vote. And then after 11 becomes a lull, and it becomes a little trickle of voters during the course of the rest of the day. The number of political parties, and it's just increasing the whole time. I give this not because of the numbers, but the trend, it's drastically increasing. And then just in a short space of time during COVID, 35 new parties were registered, of which 24 national, 11, and 25% of them start with an A. There's a good reason for that. They want to be on top of the ballot paper, or as close as possible to the top. So you have, everything starts with almost with Alliance or African or amalgamated, as long as it starts with an A. And there you can find some, these are just some interesting names: Amalgamated Rainbow Movement, Democratic Artists Party. I don't know how many they're going to get. And perhaps they thought of us here, Disability and Older Persons Party, but they counter that with the Young People's Party, the Disrupt Party. You vote for that one. And then Nehemia Rebuilding Cities, a strange name. And they go, because there are so many parties, you've got to be very innovative in the name that you choose so it doesn't overlap with another one. Now, the trends that might happen that could influence voting patterns, and this is where I'm going to spend most of my time. That was just background. Poor service delivery. Now, if that were to be the norm, there should have been many more changes throughout municipalities in South Africa. And it's not happening. People complain bitterly, they hold protest actions, and then, strangely enough, they vote for the very same party again. Or they're quite happy if there's a non-performing party and they will support that party. Now, on that very issue of poor service delivery, from now onwards, you're going to find a host of protest actions coming throughout the country. We saw it recently in Grabouw. There are quite a few threatened there. There was some action here in Kleinmond area recently. It's got mostly nothing to do with municipalities. in Die Burger recently, a person wrote and said he's not going to vote in the municipal elections because the post office is in a poor condition. And one would have thought this is a fairly intelligent voter, but the fact is municipalities don't run post offices. They don't run police stations, hospitals, schools. But the protest actions often concern matters like that. And then they picket and burn tires, etc., at municipal offices. Will burn down a library because there's no clinic. And this is a problem that we often confronted with. I'm very concerned about that issue. And sooner or later, it must be addressed at national level. Corruption, fraud, and theft, it's very prevalent and we saw it even now with COVID, in how many municipalities this happened, where in the city of Johannesburg, they paid ridiculous prices for a certain protective equipment. I think for a bottle of sanitizer, which you could buy in one of the major chain stores for about 40 Rand, they paid almost 4,000 Rand. And in spite of that, you still find people voting for the same thing. It should somehow along the line influence people. I'd like to think that the young people who are not voting are influenced by matters such as these. Financial mismanagement, again, this should be a persuasive factor. It apparently doesn't influence a lot of people if there is financial mismanagement. It's different to fraud and corruption. This is simply not doing financial accounting properly with adverse and disclaimers by the Auditor General. It simply doesn't matter. There's just been in Matsikama, which is in the Western Cape, a situation where there was a takeover from, I'm going to mention this is factual, it was run by the DA. It was taken over about a year ago by the ANC-led alliance. There was 46 million Rand in the bank account. They're now at an overdraft at 155 million Rand. And that's purely financial mismanagement. From a clean audit going down to what I suspect will be either an adverse or a disclaimer or something of that nature. But the voters still vote for that grouping. The next factor is not responding to needs. Surely if people express their needs, voice their needs, and the politicians promise to fulfill those needs, you should call the politicians to account. Now, there might be other cases, and I think this is what we have to be sensitive to as well. People voice specific needs, and then somehow in the system it gets lost, and then people get disgruntled about this. In a community such as, let's say, Hermanus, your needs are not necessarily basic roads and stormwater. That's important, but you sometimes have a need for cultural activities. And how high is that on the list of politicians? Poor or no communication. This is a serious matter. You often find that the politician goes around, you'll find the phrase door-to-door canvassing. Then you'll find the material on the screen of politicians, often ministers, even the president, walking from one shack to the other for about 3 shacks, doing door-to-door canvassing. And that's the last time the voters see these politicians. They don't hear from them. They don't respond to correspondence. They don't react to calls by the community to attend community meetings. So this becomes very problematic, and there should be more responses from us. Poor COVID-19 management. The municipalities were not predominantly involved in this matter, but they did, however, play a role. And you'll find that, for instance, in Werner, it was pretty well managed in the sense that certain facilities were made available and there was good cooperation. People should be worried about this in the next municipal election. Bloated staff structures and nepotism. Surely this must influence voters. If you find that, first of all, if you're not related to a politician, you don't stand a chance of getting employed. That should be a reason for discontent, but apparently it doesn't always count. Bloated staff structures, and this is where people expand the staff structures just so that they can employ their own staff. There's a small municipality in the Western Cape that was recently taken over. One of the first steps that was taken, they're under money, they're really in a bad state, is to immediately increase the number of staff in the mayor's office. All political appointments, family, friends, and members getting appointed there. There was a small municipality in the northern part of KwaZulu-Natal, Umhlabuyilingana. It had 3 mayoral chauffeurs, but no cashier, because all the chauffeurs were related to the mayor. In Eastern Cape municipality, the mayor's office had 21 people working there, and the total fire service consisted of 20 people with a high fire risk, just to give an indication of what's going on in some places. Political squabbling. This should upset most of us at any stage. You find the infighting in political parties being rife, and it eventually goes about one thing, and that is my own interest above all. What is it in it for me as the politician? And this should be a reason for very serious reservation about casting my vote. I'm going to say a sensitive thing, and it's the fact that I understand a prostitute will tell you what services she provides and at what price. The problem with some of these politicians in certain areas, they don't even say that. And that's what they're doing. They're peddling their voices, their bodies, if you want to call it that, to the highest bidder. I know of a certain municipality where a councillor was approached with an amount of 500,000 rand to switch allegiance. This happens regularly. The moment you can grab the power, you go into it for not always for political gain or for better service delivery. It's what's in it for me. The reason why this can happen is that some of the positions are so-called full-time positions. That includes the mayor, the deputy mayor, the speaker, the 10 members of the mayoral committee, and then often the chief whip. So these are full-time positions, and they earn a lot of money. It's big money, and many of those incumbents will never earn that kind of money in the private sector or doing any other kind of work. Of course, there are fantastic exceptions, dedicated people, wonderful politicians, intelligent, making a lot of sacrifices. I know of quite a few in Werner who fit into that category, who are really, really good. But unfortunately, in many other municipalities, this is not the case. They really want to see what's in it for them at all times. And this is a huge concern. For instance, in Nelson Mandela Bay municipality, the speaker had to be forced by a court order to convene a meeting, because the speaker knew if that meeting is convened, there will be a shift in power, new allegiances. As you probably are aware, Nelson Mandela Bay Municipality, as well as Johannesburg Municipality, there was a power shift, and led to new grouping coming in Nelson Mandela Bay Municipality. There's again been a new grouping taking over. So what happens is that a person often of a minority party acts as so-called kingmaker. The parties are pretty evenly split, and this person goes and says, right, you make me the deputy mayor, get a nice fat salary, and although I'm the lone representative of my party, I effectively can swing this council. So it's a hung council until this person takes that decision where he's going to sell himself to. There was a small municipality a few years ago where the division was 4 ANC, 4 DA, and 1 PAC. So the PAC guy went to the ANC, said, right, you make me the mayor and I'll go, you can get the power. And they agreed. And then after a while, they sensed, no, they're uncomfortable with this guy. He's exercising his powers to the detriment of the other guys. And then he went to the DA and he said, look, I can join you, but again, make me the mayor, then the DA can control this municipality, which duly happened. And then the DA got fed up with him, and then the 8 others, the ANC and the DA, got together and said, let's kick this guy out. And they started an action against him. Unfortunately for them, they didn't do this properly. They framed him in an incorrect manner. I was the presiding officer and I had to acquit him because these were all fabricated allegations against him. So back to square one again there. I'm going to carry on now. This district development model, I'm just referring briefly to this. This is something that is panning out in the background. It's not very prominent, but the idea is that, and there's nothing wrong with the concept in principle, I proposed it a number of years ago, is that you strengthen the district municipalities where the local municipalities are underperforming and render the most services from the district. So in principle, it has a lot of merit. What is happening now is that you bring in national and provincial departments together there under the political leadership of a member of the cabinet. Now, I don't like that concept at all. Districts could then become a governing group with certain powers that will overrule the local municipality to a certain extent. This happened when I was in Werferstrand at one stage. Werferstrand was managed by one political grouping, but the district was managed by another political grouping. And it was very difficult to operate there, and certain things took place in the district within their powers, which cost Werferstrand a lot of money. And so be wary of this. It's looming in the background. It's part of a strategy, again, of taking political decision-making away from the local level to a higher level, and where it's under control of fewer people. As I said, in principle, there's a lot of merit for this, for the simple reason that it's difficult to provide services in some of these far-flung areas. People don't want to work there, and I understand that fully. I can expand on that if necessary. All right, my local predictions. I'm coming slowly now towards the end of this presentation. Again, I want to emphasize these are my own non-political views. I don't support any party actively or any other way. So these are just my own non-political views. The voter turnout could be a major factor. You saw it in one of the slides. That's why I showed it. If you have 60–70% voter turnout of a certain age group, it will mean a lot. And if you have a lower voter turnout in the younger groups, that will also definitely influence the whole position. So it's going to swing it whichever way. And voter turnout has invariably been lower than at national level, but as the last one, it was actually quite high. Then the weather conditions, some people simply don't go and vote when it's raining or it's a lot of wind. And then hopefully there won't be any COVID regulations applicable there. But if there are, this might also influence people, the elderly, the fragile. They might be a bit worried about that. New ward that has been added and the redemarcation of that ward and of certain other boundaries. We're not sure how this is going to affect the voting in Wernerstrand itself. So the council is enlarged, as I mentioned earlier. And by the way, I slipped a slide there, but there is special voting possibilities. I can go back to the slide if necessary at some stage. The quality of the ward candidates. If you find a person who is rejected by the community, it could impact on that specific ward. As you know, they are mainly, unless they're independent, they're nominated by a political party. Political party can be one of those that I referred to. If that party is not in touch with the local electorate, there could be a negative attitude towards that specific candidate. There have been cases where a ward candidate is extremely popular, and then for some reason or another is worked out by his political structure, and then there's a vacancy in a by-election. That former ward councillor stands again and gets elected, even above the political party that he belonged to previously. So there's a strong trend in this regard, whether he gets support or not. And then how the perceptions on how the municipality managed the COVID pandemic. I'm not sure whether this is going to play a significant role, but it could play a role there. Now, the municipality is currently busy with a new budget. So this budget will become operational on the 1st of July this year and will be partially implemented by the time the elections take place, but not the full implementation. Now, it's going to affect people differently. I distinguish between ratepayers, in other words, the people who actually pay the rates and taxes. What is their perception? What value do they get for their money? And then the service beneficiaries, quite often people who don't pay for anything, are the beneficiaries and are quite often most vociferous in their demands that they're getting poor service delivery. And if I can mention this, there's a trend of political parties to try and buy votes, in inverted commas, to say, well, I'm giving this to these beneficiaries and see if they'll vote for my party. This doesn't often happen. You throw money at beneficiaries and it doesn't swing those votes. There's a strong competition going to be, especially in the, let's call it the township areas of Wernerstrand. between the predominantly, let's call it, black parties, black-based parties. I'm not trying to be racialistic here at all. I'm just giving an indication of what is the reality on the ground. And it's very interesting what may happen there, because you're going to probably have a split vote. You might even have any of these three coming in with, let's say, 36% of the vote, and the others at just over 30% each. So it could be a tightly fought election, and any party could come in there in some of those wards, especially I would suggest the Zwelishle area. This is where you're going to find this predominantly. And there are lots of voters in that area there. Now, my prediction is there might be a DA majority. Again, I'm not saying this for any political reason, but just based on the history and other information. But I suspect it can be decreased due to a few things. Outside Oorverstrand, the perceived leadership squabbles at national and provincial level. And they are, again, voting for leaderships in various provinces. And it appears a bit nasty. Of course, the press blows this up and makes news of it, but it is there. It's not unknown. I don't have to tell you about this. We've seen it with the re-election or the election of the leader of the DA at the moment, John Moody's quitting, and various other people, Wusi Maimane. I don't have to go into that, but it's how people are going, voters are going to perceive that squabble. The rise of the Freedom Vryheidsfront Plus, it was significant in 2019. I don't know whether it's going to continue, but it was a marked increase there. And that will, they're not going to get votes, steal votes from the ANC or anything like that. If they get votes, it will be from predominantly the DA, I suggest. Now, many of the new voters, newly registered voters, tend to support the black dominant parties and not go for the DA. Surprisingly enough, the EFF is not always the lower level of development people that people think it's the case. They have a high percentage of intellectuals in that party, and they're supported by a lot of students in various campuses. So this could be that they rather support the EFF than the DA. I think the DA was bargaining to collect some of these votes. Then the minor parties will probably end up as also rands. The very small, the COPE, UDM, many of those there'll probably be about 20 parties on that ballot paper, but they'll split the votes away from the major parties, and that could lead to balancing in the different wards, that you get a party coming in that you didn't expect to go there. And that's the end of this presentation. I want to thank you.
Excellent, Werner. Thank you very much. Werner, there's a question from Anina. Where is the new Overstrand ward?
I didn't get that. It's unfortunate. I went onto the website of the demarcation board, and then it says this website is not available at this stage. So I'm not sure exactly where it is, but I suspect it's in the Zwelishle area. That's where the biggest growth took place. With cutting and adjusting from the other wards. I'm sorry, I anticipated that question, but I couldn't get hold of it.
Anyway, Werner, thank you very much for a very comprehensive view of all the statistics and issues. It really must have taken you a lot of time to compile all of this. Any other questions on this very complicated topic?
No, just to say I learned so much. Very, very interesting and very nicely presented for us to get a clear understanding of how everything works. Thank you, Werner.